Keth Von stood once again in the crystal chamber of Galactic Council headquarters, but this time he carried data that would change everything. 6 months of observing human military operations had filled his reports with information that challenged 3 centuries of galactic military doctrine. The hologram of Council Leader Zeth Prime materialized before him, expectant and confident. Observer Keith Von, present your findings on human military capabilities, the ancient being commanded. Keth Von activated his data displays, showing tactical recordings from the battles he had witnessed. Council Leader, my observations reveal capabilities that exceed all previous models for military effectiveness. Explain, Zeth Prime said, his interest clearly piqued. Humans do not fight wars the way other species fight wars. Keth Von began. They do not seek to minimize risk or preserve resources. They deliberately create chaotic situations and then exploit them. They treat impossible odds as opportunities rather than obstacles. The hologram flickered as Zeth Prime processed this information. You observed multiple engagements? 7 major combat operations across space and ground environments. In each case, humans achieved victory against overwhelming odds through tactics that should not work according to established military science. Keth Von showed footage from the Kepler colony defense, where a single destroyer had defeated 12 heavy cruisers. They used their own ship's limitations as weapons against enemies with superior firepower. When conventional tactics failed, they improvised new strategies. In real time, improvisation is common among young species, Zeth Prime observed. It usually leads to heavy casualties and eventual defeat. That is what makes humans different, Keth Von replied. Their improvisations work. More troubling, their performance improves under pressure rather than degrading. Combat stress makes them more creative, more determined, and more effective. The data displays showed recordings from the Titan Station assault. Watch how they respond to casualties. When their assault shuttles are destroyed, they use the gaps created by their own losses to penetrate enemy defenses. They convert their deaths into tactical advantages. Zeth Prime's hologram grew brighter as his attention focused completely on the reports. You observed this pattern consistently? Every engagement demonstrated the same characteristics. Humans escalate their capabilities when facing extinction, rather than surrendering or retreating. They treat near-death experiences as learning opportunities. Keth Von activated recordings from ground combat operations. They fight in environments that should be uninhabitable and use hostile conditions as weapons. Radiation, vacuum, toxic atmospheres, and equipment failures become tactical assets rather than obstacles. Most disturbing is their learning curve, he continued. Each battle teaches them new capabilities that they immediately integrate into future operations. They are evolving as warriors in real time, becoming more dangerous with every conflict they survive. The chamber fell silent as Zeth Prime processed these revelations. When he spoke again, his voice carried undertones of concern. What is your assessment of the threat level humans represent? Keth Von hesitated before answering. The truth would terrify the Council, but his duty required complete honesty. Council Leader, I believe we have fundamentally misunderstood the nature of the Tier 1 threat. Explain. Humans are not currently dangerous because they have not yet been truly tested. Every conflict I observed represented humans operating far below their maximum potential. They fought against pirates, raiders, and criminals. They have never faced an existential threat to their species. The implications hung in the air like poison gas. Zeth Prime's hologram flickered with what might have been uncertainty. You believe they are capable of greater military effectiveness? I believe we have only seen the beginning of what humans can become, Keth Von replied. Their current capabilities already exceed our military models. If they ever face annihilation, they will transcend every limitation we think we understand about warfare. Keth Von activated his final data compilation. I have identified 3 characteristics that make humans unique among all species I have studied. First, they use warfare as a catalyst for evolution. Second, they convert disadvantages into tactical advantages. Third, They have no apparent ceiling to their adaptive capabilities. What do you recommend? Zeth Prime asked. Under no circumstances should the Council take hostile action against humanity, Keth Vaughn said firmly. War with humans would not end in their defeat. It would end with them becoming something we cannot predict or control. The silence stretched for long minutes. Finally, Zeth Prime spoke. Your report will be reviewed by the full Council. Are you certain of your conclusions? I am certain that everything I observed represents humans fighting for limited objectives against inferior opponents. They were not fighting for survival. If the galaxy ever forces them to fight for their existence, the conflict will reshape them into something beyond our current understanding. The hologram began to fade. Your service is noted, Observer Keth Vaughn. You will remain available for additional questioning. Alone in the crystal chamber, Keith Vaughn composed his final personal log entry. The official reports contained tactical analysis and strategic recommendations. His private thoughts contained fears that would haunt his sleep for years to come. He had witnessed humans treat impossible situations as puzzles to solve. He had watched them use their own deaths as weapons against their enemies. He had observed them thrive in conditions that would destroy other species. Most terrifying of all, he had seen them improve their capabilities during combat itself. The humans he observed had fought for colonies, mining rights, and trade routes. They had never fought for the survival of their species. Keth Vaughn tried to imagine what humans would become if they ever faced true extinction. The mental exercise terrified him. His reports recommended against any hostile action toward humanity. He hoped the Council would listen, but deep in his mind, he suspected they would not. The galaxy's established powers would eventually see human expansion as a threat requiring military response. When that happened, Keth Vaughn feared the conflict would not end with human defeat. It would end with humans discovering capabilities that no species in galactic history had ever developed. War would not diminish humanity. It would forge them into something unprecedented. His final observation haunted him most of all. Humans did not fight wars to achieve specific objectives like territory, resources, or political control. They fought wars to discover what they were truly capable of becoming. Each conflict pushed them beyond their previous limitations and revealed new potential for growth. Keth Vaughn had been sent to observe humans fight. Instead, he had witnessed the early stages of a species that used warfare as a catalyst for transcending the boundaries of possibility itself. The implications terrified him more than any military threat he had ever analyzed. If the galaxy ever went to war with humanity, the conflict would not be decided by superior technology, numerical advantages, or tactical doctrine. It would be decided by which side could adapt faster to impossible circumstances and transcend their own limitations. Keth Vaughn had observed enough human combat operations to know the outcome of such a contest. Humans did not just adapt to impossible circumstances. They sought them out, thrived in them, and used them as fuel for becoming something greater than they had been before. The Galactic Council would receive his reports and make their decisions. But Keth Vaughn suspected that regardless of what those decisions were, humanity's journey toward discovering their true potential had only just begun. He had observed the opening chapters of a story that would reshape the galaxy's understanding of what intelligent species could achieve, and he feared that by the time that story reached its conclusion, humans would have become something that no other species could predict, understand, or stop. The emergency briefing at Colonial Command brought together every senior officer in the sector. Keth Vaughn attended as part of Admiral Patricia Hayes' communications staff, having arranged another transfer to observe high-level human military operations. The intelligence report spread across the briefing room table painted a terrifying picture. Titan Station hung in space like a mechanical mountain, bristling with defensive weapons and energy shields. The massive facility housed a planet-killer weapon capable of destroying entire worlds from across star systems. Separatist forces had captured the station 3 days earlier and were threatening to use the weapon against 3 human colonies unless their demands were met. The station's defenses are considered impregnable, reported intelligence officer Colonel Mark Davis. energy shields that can deflect capital ship weapons, automated defense grids with overlapping fields of fire, and a garrison of 10,000 elite soldiers from multiple species. Admiral Hayes studied the tactical displays, showing Titan stations' formidable defenses. Any conventional assault would require a massive fleet and months of siege warfare. The human force available consisted of only 12 ships and 3,000 assault troops. "What's the timeline?" Hayes asked. 18 hours until they start destroying colonies, Davis replied. "They're demanding complete withdrawal from the sector and recognition of their territorial claims." Keth Von expected the admiral to request reinforcements or attempt diplomatic negotiations. The tactical situation was hopeless by any standard analysis. A frontal assault against such overwhelming defensive advantages would be suicide. "We attack in 6 hours, Hayes announced. "Full assault, all available forces." The room fell silent. Several officers exchanged glances that suggested they questioned their commander's sanity. Colonel Davis cleared his throat diplomatically. "Admiral, with respect, our analysis indicates that a successful assault would require at least a 10-to-1. Numerical advantage and extensive siege preparations." "Then it's fortunate we don't plan to conduct a conventional assault," Hayes replied. Her voice carried absolute confidence that somehow they would succeed. "Colonel Turner, I want you to develop assault plans that assume our enemies will react conventionally to unconventional tactics." Commander Chris Turner nodded as if impossible missions were routine assignments. "What parameters should I work within?" "None," Hayes said simply. "The only constraint is that we have 18 hours to save 3 billion lives." Keth Von found himself assigned to Admiral Hayes's command ship during the operation. The UES Constellation served as the flagship for the assault fleet as it approached Titan Station. The Admiral's casual confidence remained steady even as long-range sensors revealed the station's massive defensive capabilities. "All ships report ready for assault," reported Communications Officer Lieutenant Sandra Kim. "Begin the attack," Hayes ordered. What followed challenged every principle of galactic military science that Keth Von had studied. The human fleet didn't approach the station in formation or attempt to overwhelm specific defensive sectors. Instead, each ship took an apparently random approach vector, while launching assault shuttles that moved in seemingly chaotic patterns. Titan Station's automated defenses opened fire on the approaching fleet. Energy beams and missile salvos created a deadly web around the facility. 3 human ships took critical damage within the first few minutes. Any rational force would have retreated to regroup. The humans accelerated their assault. "First wave shuttles away," Turner reported from his tactical station. "They're taking heavy casualties but maintaining their approach vectors." Keth Von watched the tactical display in growing horror as shuttle after shuttle was destroyed by defensive fire. The human assault appeared to be disintegrating before it reached the station. Then he began to notice patterns that made no tactical sense. The destroyed shuttles weren't random casualties. Their sacrifice was creating gaps in the station's defensive coverage. Each loss opened a brief window that following shuttles exploited before being destroyed themselves. The humans were using their own casualties as tactical assets. "Second, wave shuttles are through the outer defenses," Kim announced. "They're reporting multiple breaches in the station's hull. The assault shuttles that survived the defensive gauntlet crashed into Titan Station at various points across its massive structure. Instead of concentrating their forces for maximum impact, the humans had deliberately scattered their assault teams across dozens of locations. This was when Keth Von witnessed the most disturbing example of human combat capability he had yet observed.
Rather than creating confusion and inefficiency, the scattered assault pattern somehow enhanced human effectiveness. "Alpha Team has secured the power distribution center," Turner reported. "Beta Team is moving on the command center. Gamma Team
has reached the weapon control systems." The individual assault teams were operating without direct coordination, yet their actions complemented each other perfectly. When Alpha Team disrupted power to defensive systems, Beta Team immediately exploited the weakness. When Gamma Team drew enemy reinforcements away from key areas, other teams advanced on their objectives. "How are they coordinating without communication?" Keth Von asked Kim during a brief lull in the battle reports. They aren't, Kim replied. Each team leader is making independent decisions based on the overall mission parameters. Somehow it works better than centralized command would. The station's defenders had prepared for a conventional assault with concentrated forces and predictable tactics. They couldn't adapt to dozens of independent human teams that seemed to anticipate each other's actions without communication. Their defense plans collapsed under the chaos of fighting enemies who thrived in chaotic situations. Lieutenant Nicole Adams, reporting from Sector 7, came a voice over the communication system. We're moving through areas that should be uninhabitable according to the station schematics. What do you mean uninhabitable? Hayes asked. Radiation levels that would kill most species, malfunctioning gravity systems, atmosphere leaks. But we're using these hazards as tactical advantages. The enemy can't follow us and they can't predict our movement. Kethvon realized he was witnessing something that transcended normal military tactics. The humans weren't just adapting to hostile environments. They were deliberately seeking out impossible conditions and converting them into weapons against their enemies. Sergeant Paul Davis led a team that had lost all their standard equipment in the initial assault. Instead of retreating, they began converting broken station systems into improvised weapons. Emergency fire suppression systems became gas weapons. Malfunctioning artificial gravity became area denial tools. Damaged power conduits became explosive devices. The equipment shouldn't work that way, the Admiral's technical advisor whispered to Kethvon. They're using systems outside their design parameters. But it is working, Kethvon replied, watching the tactical display show steady human progress throughout the station. Most terrifying was how the humans responded when the station's AI began psychological warfare. The computer system started broadcasting images of their loved ones being tortured, playing recordings of their families begging them to surrender, and creating hallucinations designed to break their will. Other species would have been paralyzed by such attacks. The humans became angry, and their anger made them more effective rather than less. They turned their emotional responses into tactical advantages, using rage as fuel for impossible feats of endurance and creativity. The enemy is trying to surrender, Turner reported 6 hours into the assault. Station Command is requesting terms. Admiral Hayes studied the tactical display. Human forces had penetrated to the station's core systems despite facing overwhelming odds. Tell them we'll accept unconditional surrender. All separatist forces are to lay down their weapons immediately. They're asking how we did it, Turner added. Their commander wants to know how we broke through defenses that were supposed to be impregnable. Hayes smiled grimly. Tell them we didn't break through their defenses. We ignored them and went around them. As the human assault teams secured Titan Station, Kethvon tried to process what he had witnessed. The humans had not simply won another impossible battle. They had demonstrated capabilities that challenged his understanding of intelligence, tactics, and the nature of warfare itself. They didn't fight like any other species in the galaxy. They created chaos deliberately and then thrived in it. They used their own limitations as weapons. They turned emotional responses into tactical advantages. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to become more capable when facing annihilation. Kethvon realized that his mission to observe human military capabilities had revealed something far more significant than combat tactics. He had glimpsed a species that didn't simply fight wars. They used warfare as a catalyst for transcending the boundaries of what should be possible. And he was beginning to fear that if the galaxy ever forced humanity to fight for its survival, the conflict wouldn't end with human defeat. It would end with humans becoming something that no other species had ever encountered. Kethvon stood in the crystal chamber deep inside the Galactic Council headquarters and waited for his orders. The tall alien had served as an observer for 300 years. His blue skin could change to match any species he needed to study. His forearms could reshape into two if required. His job was simple: watch other races and report what he learned. The hologram of Council Leader Zeth Prime appeared before him. The ancient being's voice echoed through the chamber like distant thunder. Observer Kethvon, you have a new assignment. I am ready to serve the Council, Kethvon replied. He had done this many times before. Study a species, learn their ways, report back. It was routine work. The humans have caught our attention, Zeth Prime continued. They appeared in space only 50 years ago. Since then, they have been involved in several conflicts. We need to understand their military capabilities. Keth Vaughn nodded. Humans were the newest species to reach the stars. Most young races were aggressive and unpredictable. They usually burned themselves out within a century or two. What specific information do you require? Their combat tactics, their weapons technology, their command structure, the usual analysis. We want to know if they pose a threat to galactic stability, or if they might serve as useful mercenaries for Council operations. The assignment seemed straightforward. Keth Vaughn had observed dozens of military organizations across the galaxy. Young species typically relied on brute force and emotional decision-making. They lacked the sophisticated strategies that came with centuries of experience. I will infiltrate their military and observe their operations, Keth Vaughn said. How long do I have? Take as much time as needed, but we expect a preliminary report within 6 months. The humans are expanding rapidly and we need to assess them before they become a larger factor in regional politics. The hologram flickered and disappeared. Keth Vaughn made his way to the preparation chambers where he would study human physiology and culture. The process took 3 days. He learned their language, their customs, their military ranks and procedures. Humans seemed remarkably similar to dozens of other bipedal species he had studied. 2 weeks later, Keth Vaughn had transformed his appearance to match a human male. He stood about 6 feet tall with brown hair and brown eyes. His documentation identified him as Lieutenant Alex Morgan, a communications officer with 5 years of service. The Council's agents had inserted his records into human databases months earlier. The transport ship dropped him at Orbital Station Gamma 7, where he would board his assigned vessel. The station buzzed with human activity. Merchants, soldiers, civilians, and workers moved through the corridors in a constant stream. Keth Vaughn observed their behavior as he made his way to the military docking bay. Humans seemed remarkably casual about everything. They laughed loudly, gestured wildly when they spoke, and showed little regard for proper protocol. He watched. 2 officers argue about a sports game while reviewing what appeared to be important supply manifests. Another group of soldiers played some kind of card game in a corridor. Their lack of discipline was exactly what he expected from a young species. The UES Defiance sat in Docking Bay 12. The destroyer stretched nearly 400 meters from bow to stern. Its hull showed signs of recent repairs and modifications. Weapon ports lined its sides like mechanical teeth. For a human vessel, it looked reasonably well maintained. Keth Vaughn presented his orders to the security checkpoint. The guards barely glanced at his identification before waving him through. Their casual approach to security confirmed his initial assessment of human military procedures. The ship's interior matched the station's atmosphere of controlled chaos. Crew members hurried through narrow corridors carrying equipment and supplies. Someone had posted hand-drawn pictures on bulkhead walls. Music played from speakers in the mess hall. The whole environment felt more like a community center than a military vessel. "You must be our new communications officer," a voice said behind him. Keth Vaughn turned to see a woman in a commander's uniform approaching. She had short blonde hair and moved with the confident stride of someone accustomed to command. "Lieutenant Alex Morgan reporting for duty, Commander," Keth Vaughn replied, offering what he hoped was an appropriate salute. "Commander Lisa Grant," she said, returning the salute with a slight smile. "Welcome aboard the Defiance. I hope you're ready for an interesting assignment." Grant led him through the ship toward the bridge. Along the way, she pointed out various sections and introduced him to crew members they encountered. The humans seemed friendly enough, though their constant chatter and informal behavior continued to surprise him. "We're currently on patrol duty in the Outer Rim colonies," Grant explained as they walked. "It's mostly routine work, but things can get exciting when pirates or raiders show up. How much combat experience do you have?" "Limited experience, Commander. Mostly training exercises and simulation work," Keth Vaughn replied. His cover story portrayed him as a relatively inexperienced officer. "Don't worry about it. Combat has a way of teaching you everything you need to know very quickly. The key is staying calm and following procedures." They reached the bridge where Grant introduced him to the senior staff. First Officer Jake Sullivan greeted him with a firm handshake. and immediately started telling jokes about the previous communications officer. Navigation Officer Tom Bradley barely looked up from his charts, but offered a friendly nod. Weapons. Officer Ryan Clark was cleaning his console and humming what sounded like a popular song. The casual atmosphere on the bridge matched everything else Keth Vaughn had observed. These humans treated their military service like an extended social gathering. He wondered how they managed to accomplish anything with such poor discipline. "Morgan, you'll be working with Chief Communications Specialist Sandra Bell," Grant said, indicating a woman seated at a complex console. "She'll show you the systems and get you up to speed on our current operations." Sandra Bell turned out to be exactly what Keth Vaughn expected from human military personnel. She was competent but chatty, explaining the communication systems while simultaneously discussing her plans for shore leave and asking about his background. Her divided attention seemed typical of human behavior. As his first day aboard the Defiance continued, Keth Vaughn compiled mental notes for his eventual report. The humans displayed all the characteristics he associated with young, aggressive species: poor discipline, casual attitudes toward authority, emotional decision-making, and an apparent inability to focus on serious matters for extended periods. He settled into his quarters that evening, feeling confident about his mission. Observing human combat tactics would be straightforward. Document their primitive strategies, note their technological limitations, and file a report recommending that the Council treat them as a minor threat requiring minimal attention. Keth Vaughn had no way of knowing that his understanding of human nature was about to change completely. 3 weeks after the Kepler incident, Keth Vaughn submitted a request to extend his observation mission. His superiors at the Galactic Council found his initial reports intriguing enough to grant additional time. They wanted more data about human military capabilities before making any policy decisions. Keth Vaughn transferred to the heavy cruiser UES Vigilant under the pretense of a routine personnel rotation. The Vigilant was twice the size of the Defiance with a crew of 400. If the Defiance crew had been exceptional, this larger ship with more personnel would provide a better sample of typical human military behavior. Captain Steve Morrison commanded the Vigilant with the same casual confidence Keth Vaughn had observed in Commander Grant. The crew displayed similar characteristics: informal interactions, constant chatter, and an apparent lack of proper military discipline. During his first week aboard, Keth Vaughn convinced himself that the Defiance had indeed been an anomaly. Then the Proxima System operation began. Intelligence reports indicated that 3 criminal syndicates had formed an alliance to control shipping lanes through the Proxima System. These weren't simple pirates but organized fleets with military-grade equipment and professional soldiers from multiple species. They had established bases on several asteroids and were demanding tribute from all passing ships. The Vigilant led a small fleet of 6 human vessels against an enemy force of 15 ships dug into defensive positions. Standard galactic tactics would require a siege lasting several months to gradually wear down the enemy's supplies and morale. Captain Morrison had different ideas. "We're going to hit them fast and hard before they can coordinate their defenses," Morrison announced during the tactical briefing. "The key is to create chaos and then exploit it." Keth Vaughn recognized this as the same type of seemingly reckless strategy that had somehow worked at Kepler. He positioned himself at a secondary communications station where he could observe the bridge crew during combat. The battle began with what appeared to be a standard fleet engagement. The human ships advanced in formation while the criminals opened fire from their asteroid fortresses. Enemy plasma cannons and missile batteries created an almost impenetrable wall of destruction. Then the humans did something Keth Vaughn had never seen before in galactic warfare. Instead of maintaining formation and trading long-range fire, they deliberately broke apart and charged directly into the enemy defenses. Each ship took a different approach vector, creating multiple crisis points that the criminals couldn't handle simultaneously. The Vigilant led the assault on the largest asteroid base. Enemy fire concentrated on the cruiser as it approached, inflicting massive damage. Multiple hull breaches vented atmosphere. Secondary explosions knocked out half the weapon systems. Any rational crew would have retreated. Instead, Keth Vaughn watched the bridge crew adapt in real time to each new crisis. When Tactical Officer Amy Parker lost her entire weapons control team to a direct hit, she moved to 4 different stations and somehow operated all the remaining weapon systems simultaneously. Her targeting accuracy actually improved as the situation became more desperate. "Direct hit on their command center," Parker announced while switching between targeting computers. "Their coordination is breaking down." Navigation Officer Carl Rogers guided the ship through defensive fire patterns that should have been impossible to survive. When his primary navigation computer failed, he switched to backup systems and then to manual calculations when those failed too. The ship's movement became more unpredictable and harder for enemies to target. Most disturbing was how the crew responded to each new crisis. Rather than becoming overwhelmed, they seemed energized by the challenges. When the main power grid failed, Chief Engineer Linda Hayes rerouted power through systems that weren't designed to handle the load. When communication with other ships was lost, the crew anticipated fleet movements without any coordination. The assault that should have taken months lasted 6 hours. The criminal alliance collapsed when their leadership structure was destroyed, and their defensive positions were overrun by tactics they couldn't counter. But Keth Vaughn's observations of human combat behavior were just beginning. 2 months later, he arranged a transfer to ground forces. The 15th Colonial Marines were preparing for an operation to retake a captured research station from separatist forces. Keth Vaughn wanted to see if human ground combat followed the same disturbing patterns he had observed in space. Sergeant Kevin Walsh led the unit Keth Vaughn was assigned to observe. The research station was a fortress built into a mountain with multiple levels of defensive systems. Intelligence estimated 400 enemy soldiers controlled the facility, which contained experimental weapons research that couldn't be allowed to fall into separatist hands. The Marine assault force consisted of only 120 soldiers. Standard military doctrine would require at least a 3-to-1 advantage for such an operation. The human commanders decided to proceed anyway. "The key is speed and surprise," Walsh explained during the pre-mission briefing. "We go in fast, hit multiple objectives simultaneously, and keep them off balance until we control the facility." The assault began at dawn with orbital bombardment of the station's outer defenses. Marine dropships descended through heavy anti-aircraft fire while fighter squadrons provided cover. Keth Vaughn rode in the lead dropship, observing how Marines prepared for combat. Unlike other species he had studied, humans seemed to become calmer as they approached danger. They checked their equipment, methodically shared ammunition and supplies, and made casual conversation about everything except the upcoming battle. Their relaxed attitude should have indicated poor preparation. Instead, Keith Vaughn sensed coiled energy waiting to be released. The dropships came under intense fire as they approached the landing zone. 3 were shot down before reaching the surface. The remaining Marines found themselves scattered across a battlefield with no chance for proper coordination. This was when Keth Vaughn witnessed something that challenged his understanding of military organization. Instead of chaos and confusion, the scattered Marine units immediately began operating as independent teams while somehow maintaining coordination with the overall assault. Corporal Janet Foster led her squad through areas of the station that should have been impassable. When their route was blocked by collapsed tunnels, she guided them through a damaged reactor core where radiation levels should have been fatal. The Marines used the radiation as cover because enemy sensors couldn't track them through it. Sergeant Walsh's unit encountered heavily defended choke points that should have stopped their advance. Instead of retreating, they began improvising weapons from station equipment. Broken conduits became explosive devices. Malfunctioning gravity generators became area denial weapons. Emergency systems designed to save lives became tools of war. Most troubling was how individual Marines adapted to impossible situations. When their assault weapons ran out of ammunition, they switched to captured enemy weapons without missing a beat. When their communication systems failed, they developed hand signals in the middle of combat. When their planned routes were blocked, they found new paths through areas that weren't supposed to be accessible. The station fell in 4 hours. An operation that should have taken weeks became a lightning assault that overwhelmed defenders who had prepared for a conventional siege. As Keth Vaughn rode back to base with the victorious Marines, he tried to process what he had observed. The Humans had not simply won another impossible battle. They had demonstrated a consistent pattern of behavior that appeared across different units, different situations, and different combat environments. Humans didn't just adapt to unexpected challenges. They seemed to thrive on them. Each crisis made them more creative, more determined, and more effective. They treated limitations as puzzles to solve rather than obstacles to avoid. Most disturbing was their learning curve. Every engagement taught them new tactics that they immediately applied to the next challenge. They were evolving as warriors in real time, becoming more dangerous with each battle they fought. Keth Vaughn began composing detailed reports about his observations, but he found himself struggling with a fundamental question that troubled his sleep. If humans could fight this effectively when facing conventional challenges, what would they become if they ever faced a truly existential threat? His 3 months of observation had revealed a species that didn't just fight wars. They used warfare as a catalyst for transcending their own limitations, and Keth Vaughn was beginning to fear that those limitations might not actually exist. The alarm klaxons woke Keith Vaughn from deep sleep. Red lights flashed throughout his quarters as the ship's announcement system crackled to life. All hands to battle stations. This is not a drill. Repeat. All hands to battle stations. Keth Vaughn quickly dressed in his uniform and rushed toward the bridge. Around him, crew members moved with sudden purpose that contrasted sharply with their usual casual behavior. The transformation surprised him. These same people who had been joking and playing games yesterday now moved like trained soldiers. The bridge hummed with activity when he arrived. Commander Grant stood at the center, studying a tactical display while receiving reports from various stations. Her relaxed demeanor from the previous day had vanished completely. "What's our status?" Grant asked as Keth Vaughn took his position at the communications console. "Distress signal from Kepler 442c mining colony," reported Navigation Officer Tom Bradley. "They're under attack by a Vorthak raider fleet, 12 heavy cruisers and multiple fighter squadrons." Keth Vaughn knew about the Vorthak. They were a vicious species that specialized in enslaving populations and stripping worlds of their resources. A fleet of 12 heavy cruisers represented serious firepower. Any rational commander would call for reinforcements. "How many civilians on the colony?" Grant asked. 50,000, including families, Sandra Bell replied from her station. Grant studied the tactical display for several seconds. The Vorthak fleet vastly outnumbered the Defiance. Standard galactic military doctrine would require at least a 3-to-1 advantage to engage such a force. A single destroyer against 12 cruisers was suicide. "Set course for Kepler 442c, maximum speed," Grant ordered. First Officer Jake Sullivan looked up from his console. "Commander, we'll be outgunned 20-to-1. Shouldn't we wait for backup?" 50,000 people don't have time to wait for backup," Grant replied. "How long until we reach the colony?" 4 hours at maximum speed, Bradley answered. "Then we have 4 hours to figure out how to beat impossible odds," Grant said. Her voice carried absolute certainty that somehow they would find a way. Keth Vaughn watched the crew's reaction to this clearly suicidal mission. Instead of protest or fear, he observed increased focus and determination. Weapons Officer Ryan Clark began running diagnostic checks on every system. Chief Engineer Maria Santos appeared on the bridge to discuss power distribution options. Even the junior officers seemed energized by the challenge. The journey to Kepler 442c gave Keth Vaughn time to observe human pre-combat behavior. Rather than growing more anxious as they approached the battle, the crew became calmer and more efficient. They shared information freely, suggested improvements to ship systems, and made jokes to reduce tension. Most puzzling was their attitude toward the overwhelming enemy advantage. Where other species would view the situation with despair, humans seemed to treat it as an interesting problem to solve. They discussed tactics that bordered on insanity, with the same casual tone they used for everyday conversation. "We could use the asteroid field near the colony as cover," suggested Bradley during a tactical meeting. "The radiation from those asteroids would interfere with our sensors," Sullivan pointed out. "It would interfere with theirs too," Clark added. "Maybe we could use that somehow," Grant nodded thoughtfully. "Keep thinking along those lines. We need to find advantages they won't expect." When they arrived at Kepler 442c, the tactical situation looked even worse than the initial report suggested. The Vorthak fleet had surrounded the colony and was systematically destroying defensive installations. Civilian transport ships tried to evacuate people while fighter squadrons harassed them. "All stations report ready for combat," Grant announced. "Remember, our job is to save those civilians. Everything else is secondary." The Defiance charged directly into the enemy formation. Keth Vaughn expected this frontal assault to end quickly, in their destruction. Instead, he witnessed something that challenged his understanding of military tactics. The human ship moved unpredictably, changing course and speed in patterns that seemed random, but somehow kept them ahead of enemy targeting systems. When Vorthak cruisers tried to surround them, the Defiance would suddenly accelerate toward one ship, fire a devastating barrage, then dart away before the enemy could respond. "Direct hit on Cruiser 7, Clark reported. "They're venting atmosphere." "Good. Shooting," Grant replied. "Sullivan, take us through the asteroid field. Let's see if we can even these odds." The Defiance plunged into the asteroid field at speeds that should have been impossible to navigate safely. Keth Vaughn gripped his console as massive rocks flashed past the view screen. The ship's sensors struggled with the radiation interference, but somehow Bradley kept them on course. 3 Vorthak cruisers followed them into the field. The enemy ships were larger and less maneuverable than the human destroyer. What happened next defied Keth Vaughn's understanding of physics and tactics. The Defiance used the asteroids as weapons. Bradley would guide them close to a large rock. Then Clark would fire precisely targeted shots that sent chunks of asteroid debris toward pursuing enemies. The improvised projectiles moved too fast for the Vorthak ships to avoid. 2 more cruisers disabled, Clark announced. "They're trapped between asteroids." But the human tactics came at a cost. Enemy fire had damaged multiple ship systems. The main engines operated at reduced capacity. Life support struggled to maintain atmosphere in several sections. Half the weapons were offline. This was when Keth Vaughn observed something that truly disturbed him. Instead of degrading under pressure, human performance seemed to improve. When Clark's targeting computer failed, he switched to manual control and somehow became more accurate. When Santos lost her engineering crew to enemy fire, she single-handedly managed repairs that should have required a full team. Most unsettling was the crew's reaction to casualties. A plasma blast breached the bridge and killed 3 junior officers. Keth Vaughn expected panic or retreat. Instead, the surviving crew members became more focused and determined. They treated their fallen comrades' deaths not as reasons to surrender, but as motivation to fight harder. "Hull breach on Deck 7, Santos reported over the communication system. "I need volunteers for emergency repairs." "I'll go," volunteered a voice from the mess hall. "Count me in," added another. Within minutes, off-duty crew members were volunteering for dangerous repair missions while the battle continued around them. Some were already injured but insisted they could still help. The fight lasted 3 hours. By any rational analysis, the Defiance should have been destroyed in the first 20 minutes. Instead, through tactics that seemed to violate the laws of physics and probability, they had disabled 8 of the 12 Vorthak cruisers and forced the remainder to retreat. The colony was saved. 50,000 civilians lived because a single human ship had somehow defeated impossible odds. As the crew celebrated their victory, Keth Vaughn sat at his station trying to process what he had witnessed. The humans had not just won an impossible battle, they had grown stronger during the fighting itself. Their skills improved under pressure rather than deteriorating. Commander Grant approached his station. "Good work today, Morgan. How did you find your first real combat?" "It was, educational, Commander," Keth Vaughn replied honestly. Grant smiled. "Combat always is. You learn more about yourself and your shipmates in a few hours of fighting than you do in years of peacetime service." As the Defiance set course for the nearest starbase for repairs, Keth Vaughn began composing his first report to the Council. But he found himself struggling to explain what he had observed. How could he describe tactics that shouldn't work? How could he explain humans who became more capable when facing death? His preliminary conclusions disturbed him. Humans did not fight like any other species he had studied. They treated impossible situations as opportunities rather than obstacles. They used their own limitations as weapons against their enemies. Keth Von realized he needed to observe more human combat operations before filing his report. What he had witnessed might be an anomaly. Perhaps the crew of the Defiance was exceptional rather than typical. But deep in his mind, a small voice whispered that he had seen something far more significant than one lucky victory. He had glimpsed a species that thrived on conflict in ways that defied everything the galaxy understood about warfare.